from Mickey, Aurora, and from me. Well, I have to tell you, I have had the pleasure of reading this wonderful book, Freddie, the Rescue Dog Who Rescued Me, by Grant Hayter Menzies. And at the end of this all, I am going to ask my techie guy to publish a photograph of it, front and back. And maybe, if you're interested, it's not very long, it's very inspiring, it's very touching. Maybe you'd like to have a little read as well. So, and Aurora says she enjoyed it thoroughly too, even though she can't read, but she could enjoy what her Marty was enjoying. And now, without further ado, since I have a lot of ground to cover, I am going to allow Aurora to maybe vacate a little bit of this space. Aurora, will you oblige, Marty? And plunge in with what free speech is necessary says. Lady C, I saw you, and maybe I should at this point say, we have a very mixed bag this afternoon. Some very gossipy, interesting, entertaining, hopefully, and important stuff to cover. So, if I will allow myself to stop interrupting myself, I will continue. I saw you on GB News discussing the King's speech at the Lord Mayor's dinner at Mansion House. I feel it was His Majesty's doing his best to encourage free speech. You seemed to agree. It's such an important issue, and I know it's dear to your heart. So I wonder if you could expand on last night's comments. You didn't really have much time to cover much ground. Well, yeah. Just enough to get the point across, and that's really what's important, isn't it? Yes, the King gave a very interesting speech. His mother would have been proud of him. It was measured, it was heartfelt, it said an awful lot without saying too much. It was wide-ranging and very focused at the same time. That's an art. Now, the King writes most of his speeches himself. He has input from his advisors, but many of these speeches he crafts himself, and they certainly express what he feels is important. And he was making an appeal to the world at large, but certainly to this nation, that we need to be civilized and accept, not only tolerate, accept differences of opinion. I have been beating this drum for some time, that it is not possible to have a civilized society that grows constructively without differing opinions that advance the debate in such a way that it leads to positive, life-enhancing progress. And he basically made that point. He also made another point, which is that we should be tolerant of each other. And there was almost a hint of that even when we don't agree, we should allow other people who have different approaches to what they regard as important and we should respect their right to go about living their lives in different ways from ours and and expressing their differing points of view. There was a hint of that, which I think is also realistic and constructive. You know, no society is a healthy society where everybody sings from the same hymn sheet. If everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet, that is totalitarianism. So I will now get to what John Farley says, because he has grave reservations about the king. And he says, heading for no monarchy, King Charles III, cardboard cutout monarch. Shocking, disgraceful, royal website not updated. Charles wipes out the monarchy by undersight and negligent arrogance. After all, the people really do not count, do they? Especially with a feudalist monarch and his World Economic Forum gangster affiliations. Well, that's certainly saying it, if I may say so, John Farley. I do not think that Charles is a cardboard cutout king. I think that he is a very earnest person who genuinely believes what he espouses. Now, I do not agree with absolutely all of the extent of all of his positions. For instance, we diverge on not the fact that the world needs to be protected and the environment needs to be protected against abuse, because we are now such a global and progressive and successful and immediate world with transport and things whiz around in terms of news in a matter of seconds, while a century ago they took months. And therefore the immediate effects of abuse are far more obvious because they are immediate, while 100 years ago they were not. But I certainly do not agree with his religiosity where climate change is concerned. I think that he has obviously never heard of the Green Sahara. Otherwise, he couldn't be making some of the statements he makes. So right there, you can see there are profound differences in what he and I would regard as the extent to which some of the things that he would advocate should be embraced wholeheartedly by everybody. Now, I certainly do believe in responsible conduct from the citizenry worldwide and not abusing the environment. I certainly agree with the dangers of plastic, but I'm sorry, I do not agree with some of the more radical, supposedly scientific points of view that he espouses. But that's not to say that by and large we don't agree on the basics, which are certainly that the environment needs to be protected. So I just make that point for what it's worth. He's not a cardboard cutout king. I do agree that it is remiss at best that the royal website does not accurately convey information as it is apparent, but I'll get to that a little later. And I think that royal website should be updated, and the fact that it is not being done, I think, is remiss. And you know, as Harry Truman said, the buck stops with me. Ultimately, if people write into the palace, it is up to the king's advisors to inform him of what the complaints are. And if they fail to do so, they are being remiss. But there comes a point when, whether the king is kept in ignorance or not, as long as he's the king or the chairman of the company or the president of the country, ultimately he bears responsibility, if only because he chose badly in having advisors who kept facts from him. So I make that point for what it's worth. As you can see, I'm not a pushover, nor do I give people an easy way out. One of my mottos is, in certain situations, the only excuse is death, and I mean it. In life, you have to be responsible, and you have to be all-encompassingly responsible. So, and I do not agree with you that the people do not really count, do they? I'm sorry. Charles's whole life and his causes have shown that he cares very much about the people, and they do count with him. The Prince's Trust has helped millions of young people in a way no other governmental institution worldwide or no other government has ever done. Sorry, he has given millions of young people a chance that they would never have had. He didn't have to do it. It was his idea totally. He set it up with his severance pay from the Navy, and he dedicated a great deal of time and effort to it. So I don't agree with that. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Now, I don't think he's also a feudalist monarch. I'm sorry, I really don't. As for his World Economic Forum affiliations, well, you know, a lot of people think that the World Economic Forum is, they describe it as communistic. It's the absolute opposite of communistic. It is capitalistic. It is what certainly was set up as being an idealistic way of getting people together economically so that they would improve the well-being economically of all mankind, share their prosperity and the knowledge that would lead to greater prosperity. Now, I agree that there are serious concerns about the World Economic Forum, some of which are definitely valid. It is run by somebody who in some circles is covered in glory and in other circles is covered in suspicion. And also, he's not elected. It's just a company. It's a company. And it punches way above its weight. And it is covered in glory in a way that is dangerous for the ongoing liberties of people all over the world. So don't think that I am not mindful of the dangers attached to having any entity set up by a private individual that everybody then sings his praises as if he is a god. And, the Bible warns you against false prophets, and it warns you against false idols. Worship no God but me. That's what God said. No false idols. And deifying somebody like Klaus Schwab is dangerous. And I can see why people all over the world have grave concerns. And these concerns should be addressed by all his supporters as well as himself. So don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not throwing my weight behind such as it is, minuscule as it is. I'm not, to rephrase that, I am not advocating for the World Economic Forum or Klaus Schwab. Not doing it at all. I have grave reservations, and so should everybody else. That doesn't mean that it should be completely ignored and it should be shut down. And certainly, I think that Klaus Schwab's ill-advised comment about everybody would have nothing but everybody would be happy was actually an extremely dangerous thing to say, and that it was ill-advised, to put it mildly. Mr. Schwab doesn't seem to understand how, or he understood too well, whichever way you want to look at it. I think he was trying to reassure people and show people how benevolent he was and how benevolent his objectives are. Well, it absolutely gave the absolutely opposite message. And people were right to sit up and listen because, first of all, everybody has the right to own. That's the first thing. And anybody who advocates to the contrary and actually thinks it's admirable is somebody to be very watchful of. And number two, to link happiness with the material benefits of being taken care of by a government, or shall we say an institution, because he wasn't specific insofar as I'm aware of who this benevolent global teat would be, as everybody was suckling on it. But the fact of the matter is that worldly acquisitions and comfort are not a guarantee of happiness. And also, happiness is not necessarily the most desirable objective in life. So clearly, Mr. Schwab has no concept of philosophy. Otherwise, he wouldn't have made a stupid comment like that. Because the fact of the matter is that you do not necessarily have to be happy to be fulfilled. And fulfillment is spiritual fulfillment, fulfillment as a human being, is far more important than the transient pleasures of happiness. So I hope I've made my position clear on that. And Mr. Shrow was obviously trying to reassure people, and at the same point that he was doing that, he was actually showing people that they need to look up and listen, and they're doing it, and that's to the good. But that doesn't mean that the basic objective is communistic, or that he's setting out to oppress the ordinary person. And that doesn't mean, incidentally, that his objective would not have the incidental effect of oppressing people. So the average human being is right to be alert to the dangers of such high-flown ideals. Let me put it that way and move on to something a little bit less weighty. Shuki says, "Dear Lady C, I have 2 questions. As the mainstream media are all flapping their gums talking of has-been's return to the UK to buy a property with this supposed assistance from his father and brother, very unlikely, I believe." Unlikely? That pig's gonna fly like you wouldn't believe it. Unlikely? Impossible. Impossible. However, let me continue. At least that's my information. What's happened to his tax status? I thought he could only visit the UK for a short period, or the taxman would be after him. Also, if he is trying to make amends with his family about what the risk assessment that was done, allegedly naming him as a threat from... Sorry, that is an awkward sentence to read. Let me redo it, if you don't mind. Also, if he's trying to make amends with his family, what about the risk assessment that was done, allegedly, naming him as a threat from within? Surely the royal family wouldn't trust the conniving little jerk again. Why would they? Why would they? Do you think Mary Magdalene and Mary, mother of our good Lord Jesus, was going to be embracing Judas after the 30 pieces of silver transaction became apparent? Surely the royal family won't trust the conniving little jerk again. I'm repeating that for a good reason. Is this all speculation and PR from the media? We should also not forget the awful scabies book is due out on the King's birthday, with help from the Harkles, I'm sure. So hardly an olive branch from the traitor Harry. Any insights? Much love to you and your family. Shuki? Very entertaining question. Oh, as I made clear while I was reading out the question, the idea of the King and Prince William helping Harry to buy a house in Britain is preposterous. First of all, Harry inherited enough money that he can buy a house in Britain without their assistance. That's number one. Number two, Harry and Meghan, by their own account, and of course, we could never doubt their word, have made at least $150 or $200 million in the last, is it 2 weeks, 2 months, or 2 years? I forget which one, but whatever it is, it was. I'll show you how it's done. I can make money. Well, with all that money that they've made, I'm sure the royal family wouldn't need to be helping him out. In fact, he needs to be helping them out. So, next thing, the supposed risk assessment that was allegedly done. Well, let's not even go there. The fact of the matter is, the family knows only too well what Harry is. They've experienced it. They've suffered at his hands. Experience, my dear, teacheth wisdom. Risk assessment only suggests the possibility. Let's put it that way. And will the scabies book have Harry and Meghan's fingerprints all over it? What do you think? Do you think the Pope's a Catholic? Do you think the chief rabbi's Jewish? I leave you with those thoughts. The fact of the matter is, a few weeks ago, they were house hunting in Malibu. A few months ago, they had moved from Montecito. They were going to be house hunting in LA and didn't. Last year, they were looking at property. Well, we're looking for property in New York because, we need security. And we can't have security with drones flying over our 16-room mansion or anywhere else, and certainly not over Tyler Perry's house. No, we can't have drones flying over our property. Oh. Don't tell anybody. But I think we need to find out what Tom Sykes has to say on the question of drones flying over property. And who is the person who actually issued the invitation? Not casting stones in any direction whatsoever. No need to. Their conduct is sufficiently eloquent, even when they are silent. Harry actually, because of his tax status, has to be careful about owning property in this country. That's number one. Number two, he needs to have, if he is going to stand a chance of retaining his Councillor of State stature and then be allowed to actually have it used, or if, God forbid, something should happen to William when he's king and George is king and George is a minor. Not that I think for a second Catherine would allow for even a nanosecond Harry as being on the Regency Council with her. I don't think she would absolutely ever allow that. But He needs all of these possibilities to be in play so that they can BS the world. And Ari Emanuel and William Morris Endeavour can snow job everybody with how fabulously important Harry and Meghan are. Because that's really the name of that game. Insofar as I'm concerned, until he does it, I'm not going to believe a word of it. That's number one. And number two, if he does it, I can tell you something. There are an awful lot of people who were friends with him here who don't want to ever see him again. Because aside from anything else, they know that anything they did could be twisted, turned, misinterpreted, abused via the Montecito Brigade, and ending up causing them personal damage and damaging the rest of the royal family. So Harry and Meghan have got themselves into a really pretty mucky state, let me tell you. Hunt Club Barbie says, the passengers of private planes are always treated accordingly. Customs goes to them. They don't go to customs, which is a big part of the privilege of flying private. That's absolutely true. And Judy Bryn says, Lady C, it has nothing to do with who they are or are not. Every person entering the US must go through customs, no matter how they enter the country. My husband and I traveled out of the US frequently in our private plane. We actually had to taxi to a circle on the tarmac in front of the customs office and wait for an agent to approach the plane before we could open the door. On the Mexican-Arizona border, if it got very hot waiting on them, but wait, we did. All of that is absolutely correct. It doesn't alter the fact of what I was saying the other day, that Harry, being the second son of a reigning monarch, is always going to be accorded the courtesies that one sovereign state allows to another sovereign state's ruling families. There's also the question of why all flights into the United States are subject to customs. Oh dear, I feel a head cold coming on. I wonder what that's all about. I tell you also, if I can get over my sniffles, it's to make sure that people don't bring drugs into the country. Drug searches. There's that as well. Although, of course, private planes hope they're going to be treated with greater courtesy and consideration, shall we say? Let's see what happens when a high-profile junkie gets done. Jacqueline Reed says, Lady C, that was such an entertaining and informative interlude. You really were on point today. Regarding Netflix and the Harkles, I have read and heard on different YouTube platforms that they have an ace up their sleeve with the amount of outtake film they have on Meghan from all the documentaries that they have participated in. The word is that this may very well be made into a version of the Royal Duchess of Sussex. This, I'm sure, would not only recoup a portion of Netflix losses, but would be an enormous success in its own right. What do you think? Personally, it would be enough to encourage me to review my decision, which resulted in myself and Netflix parting company. Jacqueline Reed, don't believe everything you hear. There are an awful load of outtakes, yes. Oh, it's a perfectly standard thing. I'm not saying that one day down the line somebody wouldn't cobble something together, but let me put it this way. A responsible entertainment company that would then use outtakes to knife one of its own participants would be inviting such suspicion from everybody else who it would then sign up, and it would have grave difficulty signing up major players if it showed itself to be so treacherous. Do you see where I'm coming from with this? Now, I'm not saying in 20, 30 or 40 years from now, while all of that is floating around and everybody's old or no longer here, and it's a completely different crew running the company. But in the meantime, I doubt it very much. It's called unethical. But having said that, it's legal, because when you participate in a show or program for any of these media companies, you have to sign a waiver allowing them to use your contributions in any way, shape, or form they want. So they certainly have the ability to do it. Whether they would have the lack of judgment to actually execute it is something else again. I personally don't think so. Joyce Hayward says, Lady C, do you think the palace actually monitors what is being said online about Harry and Meghan? I would imagine only vague oversight. I don't think they're employing 6 people to work through on a daily basis the volume of stuff. However, in the olden days there used to be cutting agencies. I don't know if they still exist now, but there are entities that distill, and I would imagine that a version of that still exists. Let me put it that way. But are they actually going to monitor everything they say and do and everything that's said and done about them? Well, they certainly monitor what they say and do, but monitor what's being said about them online. I know that the view of one of the senior members of the household staff, because he said it to me, that there are an awful lot of crazies out there. That doesn't mean that they don't also listen to people who are moderate in their views and who modify their conduct. But there is that attitude. And I have to say, anybody who's involved with the internet knows that there are an awful lot of crazies out there, but there are also an awful lot of very wise, intelligent, sophisticated people, sometimes of a certain age with experience of life, who entertain and occupy themselves with getting to the truth and the kernel of the matter. And it certainly behooves anybody involved in the media to be aware of that and to appreciate the existence of these people. I certainly do. And I would be very disappointed if Buckingham Palace didn't. But I've never had any great faith, I have to tell you, in the Buckingham Palace press office or their media management, or indeed their ability to keep their finger on the pulse. I have personally experienced too many occasions on which I knew far more about what was going on where their charges were concerned than either they or their charges themselves knew. I refer in particular to the breakdown of the Wales marriage. And on that note, let's switch to the next question, which is Urban Nanny says, Lady C, are we ever going to hear the truth about the invisible children? Yes, you are. I have it on very good authority that the projected launch of that, shall we say, missile is spring next year. It's been delayed for various reasons, none of which it would be advisable or sensible or anything desirable to go into. But next spring, hopefully there won't be many delays beyond next spring. Hopefully there will be no delays beyond next spring. The girls, well, it's Mickey, as you can hear. Mickey is sound asleep, and Aurora is curled up with her as well. Oh, so sweet. Kim McCulley says, to write King Charles or Buckingham Palace, the address is His Majesty the King, Buckingham Palace, London, SW1A1AA. The letter should be addressed to a private secretary and ask for the contents of your letter to be known to His Majesty. Lady C, could you please put the correct protocol in your description? While leaving comments are worthwhile, it's important to take the time to send a proper letter. In my opinion, enough letters will get the King's attention. I agree. I believe it's already in the description of how to write to the King. I will have it looked at, and if it's not, I will have it put in. But I thought it was already information available on this program. Rosebud says, I think the royal website accurately represents the status quo. If it didn't, it would be changed. Now, this is a really interesting take on things. The Sussexes are representing the King on the international stage, and their antics have a purpose of distracting attention from what the King, William, and Edward are doing with the World Economic Forum, United Nations, European Union, World Health Organization, and various world leaders. They certainly seem to be more interested in the USA, Middle East, Ukraine, and Germany than in the Commonwealth countries. Why? Well, royal families have to deal with existent entities and institutions, even when they do not necessarily agree with them. they have to interact with them as and when the government requires it. Whatever their personal views, if of course their personal views accord with some of the positions that these various bodies take, of course they're more comfortable. But good governance is also getting along with that which you do not necessarily wholly agree and trying to reshape it into something that you regard as more amenable. Your idea that the royal website is accurate and therefore accurately reflects the status quo and the desire of the king and Prince William to have Harry and Meghan representing them in the way they do is a very interesting take. I'm not sure I agree with it. I don't think either William, or I should say especially William, or the king would be that cynical and hypocritical. I think they are both fairly straight shooters and fairly straight batters. I think the king is more accommodating and gentler than William. Obviously, William, Harry, Charles are all descendants of Prince Philip, who was one of the fathers of the ecological movement. And they therefore have skin in the game, so to speak. And it is my view that they have been at times influenced by scientific rhetoric and findings that skeptics would question in a way that they didn't. But that is not to say that they are cynical or as to have a fifth columnist representing them. And quite frankly, if they were, they don't deserve your or my loyalty, because they would be taking all of us for fools. And I don't think that's true or fair. And finally, PMT says, Lady C, Lady Glenconner, has been sounding off about how she believes that Peter Townsend encouraged an underage Princess Margaret to fall in love with him. Your thoughts would be most welcome. Yeah, Anne Glenconner, who was a childhood friend of Princess Margaret, remember, and knew her very well and became her lady-in-waiting, but they were lifelong friends. She said that recently that as far as she was concerned, that she felt that he was very remiss in encouraging her. I'm going to quote what she said. I once asked her about it, actually. He was a war hero, very attractive. She was very, very young. She was only 15 when he first arrived, and he was a married man. I think he encouraged her, which he shouldn't have done. Okay, here goes. Because my great friend Mark Sykes' mother was King George VI's great girlfriend, in quotes. Rosemary Townsend was someone else that the king used to flirt with. Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, had no interest in that side of things. And he was allowed to flirt as much as he wanted to. And she encouraged it. Mark used to tell the story about at a ball at Buckingham Palace, how the king and his mother went upstairs to have a quiet few moments together. Oh, he was a bit peckish, and they went upstairs and had something to eat together while everything was going on downstairs. Oh, Princess Margaret was actually 14 when Peter Townsend was seconded to the palace as an equerry. He was a war hero, he was divinely handsome, and I know people who knew him, and I'll tell you something interesting before I forget it. I was at a reception of a friend of mine who is an exiled royal, and she introduced me to one of Peter Townsend's closest and oldest friends, who told me that Peter Townsend was actually very glad he did not marry Princess Margaret, and that he married the Belgian girl who looked like Princess Margaret that he did. And he thought that Peter Townsend felt he had a lucky escape. That's what he said. I say that for what it's worth. She was 14 years old when he arrived. His marriage was not in great shape. Ultimately, it broke down. While they were at the palace, the marriage disintegrated between Peter and Rosemary Townsend. She ended up having an affair with and marrying John de Laszlo, the famous portrait painter Philip de Laszlo's son, by whom she had 2 sons, one of whom I've actually met socially. He's also an artist. And ultimately, she ended up being Lady Camden. She married the Marquis Camden, whose son, Lord Michael Pratt, it has to be said, was one of the biggest prats I ever met. So not be too unkind. Well, while she was flirting with John de Laszlo, or before she seriously flirted with John de Laszlo, she was flirting with King George VI, and everybody thought it was funny. And Margaret started flirting with Peter Townsend. And I have no doubt that Anne Glenconner is right, that Peter Townsend encouraged it. But this is, with hindsight, when did he start to encourage it? Because Princess Margaret was extremely strong-willed, extremely pretty, extremely spoilt by both her parents, and her father. There is an incident where she, in the presence of her father, was tickling a sleeping Peter Townsend. This was while she was a teenager, incidentally, and while he was still married to Rosemary. So I think certainly King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother as she became, thought that it was just innocent and nothing untoward. But it then became apparent that Princess Margaret was in love with Peter Townsend. And my understanding is that she is the one who was the initiator at all stages of the relationship. And you know, we don't know that he didn't try to discourage her. We really don't know that. We do know the outcome, but we don't know that if he tried to discourage her. Nobody knows that. And I think we need to give him, if not the benefit of the doubt, we need to acknowledge that there is room for doubt, because Princess Margaret was extremely assertive. In fact, she was very aggressive in terms of landing the men she wanted. And yes, she fell in love with him when she was young. There's never been any suggestion that the relationship started before it should legally have done so, in terms of age of consent, etc. And a courtier, especially a good-looking courtier, is at the mercy of a princess on heat. Let's put it that way. Because if he is too ardently against the relationship, it can result in his being dismissed. And of course, if there is a genuine attraction, which there was, ultimately, nature is going to take over and he's going to be seduced. But my understanding is that Princess Margaret was the seductress, and Peter Townsend he simply went along with it. But how willingly initially is open to question. And I'm not saying that Anne Glenconner is wrong, but Anne Glenconner was very much Princess Margaret's friend, and she, I think, disapproved of what she said, of the way the whole situation was handled. And she most likely knows what I know, which is that Princess Margaret did not end that relationship, that Peter Townsend ended it. And that would actually give her cause to be really harsh where the beginning of the relationship was concerned. So hopefully that answers that question. And on that note, I will say thank you very much for listening. I hope this has been of some interest to you. If it has, please keep the questions and comments coming in. And thank you. God bless. And if you have truly enjoyed this, could you please like, share, subscribe, press the notification bell, and take good care. Godspeed. Bye-bye.